Hello, and welcome to Sim Games TO, and I'm your host Tony. So today I want to talk to you about noise pollution. And I'm going to take a two-pronged approach to this, where I'm going to talk about what causes noise pollution and how to solve this in the way that you build your city. Now, some of you may already know the basics when it comes to noise pollution, but I know that you like to watch these kinds of videos because you like to better know and understand the deeper mechanics of the game. So I'm going to go into the details of how noise pollution affects your city. It may be something that you may not be aware of even if you have been playing City Skylines for a while. So I am working on making the real-life build of London, Ontario, Canada, and I'm going to explain to you how noise pollution essentially works and how to make your city to avoid having this problem. So, one of the mechanics of the game that is taken into consideration is the amount of noise pollution that is being created for your residents. I want to be clear here that noise pollution is something that only affects the health of residential buildings. Noise, and the same goes for land pollution, does not affect anything else such as commercial, industrial, or leisure buildings. In fact, the very reason that cities have zoning bylaws in the first place is to have designated places in the city where it is okay to operate buildings and activities that make noise and keeps these away from residential areas. Now, in the game, when you place buildings, there are always two indicators when you hover over the building that give you a noise and land pollution number. These indicate the amount of noise and land pollution that each building makes. Then when you go to place the building in the city, it also shows you a transparent circle that shows you the distance in which that particular building's noise and land pollution will reach in effect. Obviously, the higher these numbers are, and the larger the circumference area of the building's radius is, the worse that this is. It is important to point out that there is a very large difference between how noise and land pollution affects residential buildings in the game. Residents have a very low tolerance for land pollution, and even the smallest amount of this can make residents sick as it gets into the water supply and air. On the other hand though, residential buildings have a considerably higher tolerance to noise pollution and can withstand an amount of noise pollution before they start to complain about this and get sick. So you don't need to worry about completely avoiding noise pollution in residential areas. But nonetheless, if you place many buildings that create noise near a residential area, this will eventually add up and cause a problem. Another factor that can create noise pollution is traffic levels on the streets caused by many vehicles using it. The amount of noise pollution created by buses and trucks is higher than by cars, and the game takes that into consideration. Train lines that are heavily trafficked by trains and close to residential buildings can also lead to noise pollution. So how do you plan your city to avoid this from happening? Well, just like you use your home to live in and workplace to work at, you need to take the same approach to planning and building your city. You want to make your city so that residential areas are for living in, commercial areas are for working and shopping at, industrial areas are for working and manufacturing at, and so on. Highways produce one of the most significant amounts of noise pollution, as vehicles traveling at higher speeds create more noise. If you have one next to residential buildings, it will definitely have a significant impact on their noise pollution. The way to deal with this is to make sure that you are using sound barriers on highways and placing trees between the highway and the residential buildings on these stretches if possible. These will both reduce the amount of noise pollution from highways. So here in my build of London, Ontario, you can see that residential areas are generally well separated from industrial ones, and commercial buildings tend to run along the main roads that are away from residential neighborhoods. On the other hand, these are still relatively close by so that Sims are still within walking distance from them. The train tracks also tend to run along the main roads, closer to commercial buildings, and even through parks in some cases, and this also reduces the noise impact on residential buildings. You may say that running trains through parks is not the best idea, but there are several examples of this in real life, and it's still better than running them through the backyards of residential buildings. Remember, as I pointed out before, that there is some level of noise pollution that residential buildings are willing to tolerate. The goal is to keeping noise pollution in mind and trying to keep this low. Now I know that noise pollution is not something that you may pay much attention to, because the noise complaint warning icon appears, the Sims may get sick sometimes, your ambulance comes and takes them to the hospital, and then that's it, right? So then why should you care about the amount of noise pollution in your city when you're building it? Well, as it turns out, there is a mechanic in the game that is not so obvious. So when there is a more moderate amount of noise pollution affecting residential buildings, this lowers the land value of these buildings. This is then counteractive to the services that your city provides and pays for. This may then ultimately result in residential buildings needing longer to level up, or not leveling up at all, which will cause your city to collect less taxes for the services that you are providing. This will then make your city less attractive for Sims to move into, and they may end up even moving out, which then could ultimately cause your residential demand to drop, and then this will inhibit the growth of your city. This all happens silently, no pun intended, since the game only gives you noise and low land value warnings in more extreme cases. So unbeknown to you, the negative impacts of noise can be having a significant impact on your city without you even knowing about it. The exact metrics as to how much noise pollution it takes before it starts to affect your residential buildings' land values is not something that I can tell you, because that is something that only the developers of the game would know, and I would imagine that that is proprietary. But we do know that the more noise pollution that residential buildings have, the more of a negative impact this will have on their land value. I hope that you liked this video, and if so, then please give it a like. You can also watch some of my other videos that cover some other topics of the mechanics of the City Skylines game that will give you a more in-depth understanding of the game and will help you to make your city better and more interesting to play. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to access my City Skylines videos in the future and to be notified of new videos I release. Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy skylining.